The small coffee shop smelled of fresh bread and roasted beans. The windows fogged from the early morning chill. People came in and out quickly. But one man walked in slowly, quietly, as if he wanted no one to notice him. He wore a simple jacket. Nothing fancy. No sunglasses to hide his face, yet still, he carried an aura that made people glance twice. It was Keanu Reeves, a man known by millions across the world. But at that moment, he just wanted a cup of coffee and a quiet corner. He hoped no one would make a fuss. No autographs, no flashing phones, only peace. He stood in line patiently, hands in his pockets, not rushing the barista. When his turn came, he spoke softly, ordered a plain black coffee and stepped aside. His eyes scanned the room, looking for a place to sit. The shop was half full, small tables by the window, a long counter at the back, and two boys sitting at a corner table, leaning close to each other, whispering in voices that carried more emotion than they thought. Keanu noticed them because, unlike others who tapped on phones or scrolled endlessly, these boys were fully engaged in their conversation, their heads bent together as if sharing a secret too precious to let out. At first, Keanu thought nothing of it, just teenagers talking, maybe about school, maybe about a game. But then, as he carried his cup to a quiet table nearby, a few words drifted to him, not loud but clear enough. He froze for a moment, unsure if he heard correctly. One boy said, "I still can't believe Dad is gone." The other boy put his hand on his friend's shoulder, whispering, "Mom is trying, but she works all the time. She can't be here. We just have to be strong." Keanu lowered himself into the chair, his back straight, his eyes on his cup, but his ears caught every word. He had no intention to eavesdrop, but something about their voices held him. There was raw pain, the kind only kids who lost too much too early could carry. He stirred his coffee slowly, trying not to stare, yet his heart already felt heavy. The boys' voices rose and fell like waves, sometimes low, sometimes trembling. One whispered, "I wish we had someone like John Wick. Not to fight people, but someone who could protect us. Someone strong but kind." The other nodded quickly. "Yeah, like in the movies. Someone who doesn't give up. Someone who would never leave us behind." Keanu blinked hard, his fingers tightening around the warm cup. They were not just talking about some hero from a screen. They were talking about him, his character, his face, his work. But in their words, he heard more than admiration. He heard need, longing, and a quiet cry for safety. It was not about guns or fights, it was about the comfort of knowing someone steady would stand beside them. For a long minute, Keanu sat still, unsure what to do. His life had given him fame, money, and recognition. But moments like this reminded him of something else. His image carried meaning beyond what he ever planned. These boys, strangers to him, saw in him a symbol of strength and kindness. They were not asking for autographs, they were whispering their pain into the air, never expecting the very man they spoke of to be just a few feet away. The shop door jingled as more customers came and went. Laughter from another table echoed. Cups clinked behind the counter. Yet for Keanu, the world had gone quiet. Only the soft voices of the boys mattered. He took a small sip, the coffee bitter, grounding him. He thought of his own past, the losses he had faced, the loneliness he carried even through success. Perhaps that was why their words pierced him so deeply. The taller boy rubbed his hands together, his voice tight. "Do you think Mom will be okay, working all those hours?" His friend sighed. "I don't know, but she always tells us to be brave. Sometimes I just wish someone like him." And he lifted a finger toward a poster on the wall, a movie poster with Keanu's face staring back, dark and fierce. "Would walk in and tell us everything will be fine." Keanu's breath caught in his chest. The irony almost overwhelming. Here they were, two boys whispering hope into each other's ears, pointing to an image of him, not knowing the real man sat so close he could hear every word. It was like fate had guided him there, not for coffee, but for them. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the steam rising from his cup, his mind racing. Should he approach them? Should he say something, or would that ruin their secret moment? He could walk out quietly, let them keep dreaming, but part of him knew he couldn't, not after hearing the truth in their voices, not after feeling the ache in his own heart that matched theirs. In that small coffee shop with the hum of machines and the soft chatter of strangers, Keanu Reeves sat silently, listening, his coffee untouched now, his mind full of the weight of two boys' whispered wishes. What he overheard was more than a conversation. It was a cry for kindness, and it left him completely still, wondering what he would do next. The boys did not know that every word they whispered was reaching the man sitting only a few feet away. They thought their voices were safe, carried, only to each other. But the quiet shop allowed their words to travel, and Keanu Reeves, sipping slowly on his coffee, heard them clearly. One boy leaned closer, his voice low but full of sadness. "I miss him every day. It's like the house feels empty without Dad." His friend's eyes dropped to the table. He whispered back, "I know, I miss him too. And I'm not even your brother. But I can feel it. Your mom is so tired she barely sleeps." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He stared into his coffee cup as if the dark liquid could hide his emotions. He did not want them to know he was listening, but he couldn't shut their voices out. The raw honesty of children cut through everything. There was no filter, no careful choice of words, just pain and longing. The first boy brushed a hand across his face, pretending to be tough. "She works 2 jobs, and still we barely manage. I hear her crying sometimes when she thinks we're asleep. I hate that I can't do anything." His friend quickly shook his head. "You're doing enough. Just helping with your little sister. Just keeping the house together. You're stronger than you think." The boy tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth refused to lift. Keanu's chest tightened. He had been in dark places himself. He knew what it felt like to lose people, to feel helpless. Hearing these boys broke something inside him. He wanted to stand up and comfort them, but he stayed still, not yet ready. He wanted to understand more. Then came the words that stopped him cold. The boy whispered, "Sometimes I pretend John Wick is real, that he would walk into our house and protect us, not with guns or fighting, but just by being there. Someone strong, someone who wouldn't leave." His friend nodded, his voice trembling. "Yeah, like in the movies, he's tough, but you can see in his eyes he cares. I wish someone like him was looking out for us." Keanu's hands tightened around his cup, his knuckles white. They were talking about him. Not Keanu Reeves, the actor, but the character he played, the symbol people attached hope to. To these boys, John Wick was not just an action hero. He was a shield, a guardian, a promise that life wouldn't always hurt. Keanu lowered his head, his long hair falling slightly forward. He felt humbled and crushed at the same time. He thought about all the roles he had played, all the years of being on screen, the fame that never really mattered to him. But in that moment, he understood something deeper. The characters he brought to life could give people strength, even children struggling to survive without a father. He realized that these boys weren't just fans. They were clinging to a symbol because they had no one else. The taller boy's voice cracked as he whispered again, "I don't tell Mom this, but sometimes I feel scared at night, like something bad will happen, and I keep thinking, if John Wick was real, he'd never let anything hurt us." The smaller boy placed a hand over his friend's and said, "You don't have to be scared. We'll get through it, but I wish too." Keanu looked away, blinking hard. The shop around him blurred. Sounds of clinking cups and soft chatter faded. All he heard was their whispered pain. He thought about his own losses, the family members he had buried, the loneliness he carried even with the world watching him on red carpets. Maybe that was why their words cut so deep, because he understood in a way most couldn't. He leaned back in his chair, his coffee untouched now. He felt like fate had brought him to this exact moment, like the universe whispered, "Listen, this is why you are here." He did not believe in coincidences anymore. Life had been too cruel, too strange, for him to think this was random. These boys needed hope, and somehow he was sitting in the very place where he could hear their wishes. As the boys continued whispering, one said softly, "Do you think heroes are real?" The other hesitated, then whispered, "Maybe not the kind in movies, but maybe there are people who care enough to help when it matters." The first boy gave a tiny nod. "I hope so, because sometimes it feels like no one sees us, like we're invisible." Keanu's heart clenched at those words. Invisible. He had spent his life trying to stay unseen when he was off camera, moving quietly through the world. But hearing children feel invisible was something else entirely. It was unbearable. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, thinking, weighing what to do. Should he step in now? Should he let them finish their conversation? Should he wait? His mind spun. But one thing was certain. He could not let these boys walk out believing no one cared. He could not let their whispered wish go unanswered. The shop door opened again. A rush of cold air entered. A family came in laughing, breaking the heaviness for a moment. But at that table in the corner, two boys stayed huddled, whispering about heroes, about survival, about their mother working herself to exhaustion, and about a man they wished was real, not knowing he sat close enough to touch. Keanu took a slow breath, his fingers loosening around the cup. He knew he could no longer sit quietly. Their words had struck too deep. They thought heroes didn't exist, but maybe today he could prove them wrong. Keanu sat frozen in his chair, the coffee in front of him now cold. He had stopped drinking it long ago, his mind too heavy with the voices of the two boys behind him. He tried to keep his head lowered, not wanting them to notice that he was listening. Yet every word they spoke pulled at his chest. He felt as though he was being asked to carry their pain, even though they didn't know he was there. The taller boy spoke again, his voice trembling as if each word weighed too much. Sometimes I feel like Dad is watching, but then I remember he's not coming back and it hurts all over again. His friend tried to be strong for him, but his eyes were wet. He whispered, "I think he'd be proud of you. You're the one holding your family together." The boy shook his head quickly. "I don't feel strong, I just feel tired, like I'm older than I should be." Keanu stared down at his hands, memories from his own past rushing back, memories of loss, of funerals, of nights spent in silence wondering why the people he loved most were gone. He had carried grief for years, and now he saw the same weight on the shoulders of children who should never have to carry it. He pressed his lips together, fighting the ache in his chest. He told himself not to cry, not here, not in public. But the truth was, their words were cutting him open, not because they spoke of him as John Wick, but because they spoke of loneliness, fear, and longing. Emotions he knew too well. The smaller boy whispered, almost as if confessing a secret. "I pretend sometimes when I go to sleep that heroes are real, that maybe someone like John Wick would walk through our door and tell us everything will be okay, that he'd sit with Mom and make her smile." Again. His friend nodded, staring down at the table. "Yeah, someone strong, someone kind, who wouldn't leave. Not like everyone else who disappears when things get hard." Keanu's jaw tightened, his breath shallow. They had no idea he was there, just a few feet away. They thought they were speaking into an empty world, and yet he was listening. He thought of how often people assumed celebrities lived untouchable lives. But here he was not Keanu Reeves the actor. He was a man who understood grief. A man who understood what it meant to need someone and find no one there. The sound of the coffee machine hissed in the background. A waitress laughed softly at a joke from another customer, but none of it touched the moment. The world around him blurred. All he could hear was the whispers of the boys. All he could see was the quiet pain etched into their young voices. He wanted to stand up right then, walk over, put a hand on their shoulders, but his body stayed still, rooted by the weight of their words. He was listening. Yes, but more than that, he was connecting. In silence, he was sharing their grief without them ever knowing. The taller boy leaned back and sighed. "You know, sometimes I feel like we're invisible, like people see us, but they don't really see us. They don't know what we're going through." His friend looked up at him, his voice steady but soft. "We see each other, that's enough." But his eyes betrayed him. The pain was too much for boys their age. Keanu swallowed hard. He thought about how often he had walked alone, unnoticed. Despite his fame, hiding behind simple clothes, living quietly, invisible by choice. But for these boys, being invisible wasn't freedom, it was loneliness. It was being left behind. That truth struck him harder than anything else. He reached, up and brushed his hair back, his eyes fixed on the steam that no longer rose from his cup. He thought about how strange life was, how in all the places he could have gone that morning, he walked into this one, at this time, to hear these two boys whisper about pain and heroes, and somehow about him. The smaller boy whispered again, "I think if heroes are real, they don't wear capes, they just help when no one else does." His friend nodded. "Yeah, heroes don't need to fight, they just need to care." Their words echoed in Keanu's mind, bouncing against his own memories, his own wounds. He felt the sting of tears pressing at his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. He knew if anyone looked at him, they would see something unusual in his face, a famous man sitting alone with tears he could not explain. He had been through many interviews, many cameras, but none of those had ever broken him the way two boys' whispers were breaking him now. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Keanu's heart was heavier with each word. He realized he could not sit there much longer without doing something. Yet he hesitated, afraid to intrude, afraid to make the moment about himself instead of them. But the pull inside him was too strong. He thought of the poster hanging on the wall, his own face staring down at them as a character they believed in, and he wondered what they would do if they looked up and realized the man from their whispers was real and sitting nearby. He almost smiled at the thought, but it faded quickly, because this wasn't about surprise or celebrity. This was about two kids in pain. The smaller boy leaned forward, his voice so quiet it was almost a breath. "Do you think anyone like that will ever come for us?" His friend hesitated, then whispered back, "Maybe not, but I hope. I hope one day." That was the moment Keanu knew. He couldn't let them leave with only hope and whispers. He couldn't let them believe no one cared. He had listened long enough. His heart was beating hard now, his decision already made. He set his cold coffee down slowly, his hand steady, his breath deep. He was about to stand, about to walk over, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe this was exactly where he was meant to be. Keanu took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling as if he had been holding it for too long. His coffee sat untouched on the table, the steam gone, the taste forgotten. He had listened. He had carried their whispers in his heart, and now he knew he could not sit there any longer. Every instinct told him to move, to do something, to show those boys they were not invisible. He placed his hand on the table, steadying himself, his mind racing with doubt. Should he reveal who he was? Should he interrupt them? Would they be frightened or embarrassed? For a moment he almost stood. Then he froze again, his eyes closing briefly. He thought about how fragile the moment was. Two boys opening their hearts in whispers. He did not want to crush that with clumsy words. He wanted to approach gently, so they would feel safe, not shocked, not overwhelmed. He gathered his courage, pushed back the chair slowly so it would not scrape against the floor, and stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the small space. He held his cup just to give his hand something to do, and then he walked toward their table, each step careful, steady, like walking toward something sacred. The boys were still leaning close, speaking softly when his voice broke into their world. "Is this seat taken?" His tone was calm, low, respectful. The kind of voice that asked, not demanded. The kind of voice that made people feel seen. Both boys looked up at once, their eyes widening, their mouths parting in disbelief. For a second they could not speak. They just stared as if their whispered wish had stepped out of the air and into reality. One boy blinked hard, trying to make sense of what his eyes were telling him. The other nearly dropped his cup, gripping it tightly with shaking hands. Keanu offered a small smile, warm but humble, not the smile of a celebrity who expected attention, but the smile of a man asking for kindness. He gestured lightly at the empty chair, waiting, giving them the choice. They nodded quickly, their bodies stiff with shock. The taller one managed to whisper, You're, but his voice failed him. Keanu sat down slowly, setting his cup on the table, leaning forward slightly so he would not tower over them. His presence was calm, steady, grounding. He did not rush to fill the silence. He let them adjust. He let them breathe. Finally, he said gently, I heard some of what you were talking about. I hope you don't mind. The boys exchanged a quick glance, their cheeks turning red, embarrassment flickering in their eyes. They had been whispering secrets, never expecting anyone to hear, and now the man they had spoken about sat across from them, real, flesh and blood. They looked down at the table, unsure what to say. Keanu leaned his arms on the table, his hands open, his voice soft. I just wanted to tell you, I'm sorry for what you've gone through. Losing someone you love is the hardest thing and it never fully goes away, but you're stronger than you think. His words were careful, but honest, not rehearsed lines, not polished speeches. They came from his own experience, from his own pain. The taller boy swallowed hard, his eyes filling. We weren't making fun or anything. Keanu shook his head quickly. I know you weren't. I could hear it in your voices. You were speaking from your hearts. The smaller boy finally found his courage, whispering, We just wish there were people like you, like John Wick, who could protect us, who wouldn't leave. Keanu's expression softened even more. His eyes shining with something unspoken, he said quietly, You don't need John Wick. You already have strength inside you, and you have each other. And you have a mother who's working harder than anyone to keep you safe. He paused, then added, But I'm honored you think of me that way. It means more than you know. The boys sat stunned, the world around them disappearing, the chatter of other customers fading, the smell of coffee and bread now distant. All that mattered was the man across from them. Not just a movie star, not just a character, but someone who had chosen to sit at their table, to listen, to speak. For a long moment, none of them moved, the air thick with emotion. Then Keanu broke, the tension with a small chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. You know, I'm not nearly as tough as the movies make me look, but I do know something about not giving up. The boys laughed nervously, their shoulders relaxing a little, the tension easing. One boy asked, his voice timid, Why did you sit with us? Keanu looked at him with quiet honesty. Because I wanted you to know you're not invisible. I heard you, and I see you, and I think you're doing an amazing job just holding on. The boys exchanged a glance again, this time their eyes, brighter, the weight on their shoulders a little lighter. Keanu sipped his cold coffee, pretending not to notice how intently they watched him. He wanted them to feel comfortable, not starstruck. He asked them about school, about what they liked to do, and soon their words flowed more easily, their voices lifting with stories, small jokes, even smiles. The moment had shifted, the heaviness still there but softened, because now they were not just two boys whispering about hope. They were two boys sitting with the very man they had dreamed about, and he was listening, truly listening. Not as a celebrity, but as a human being who cared. And as Keanu sat there talking, listening, he knew something had changed for all of them. For the boys, it was the proof that kindness could appear when least expected. And for him, it was the reminder that sometimes being present, being gentle, could mean more than any role he had ever played. Keanu sat with the two boys, his large frame leaning forward so they would not feel small beside him, his eyes calm, his voice gentle. He did not want them to feel like they were sitting with a movie star. He wanted them to feel like they were sitting with a friend. For a moment, the boys stayed stiff, unsure if they should even speak, but his quiet presence made them relax little by little, until their whispers became words spoken aloud. The taller boy cleared his throat, his voice shaky. We didn't think anyone was listening. Keanu gave a small smile. Sometimes the world has a way of bringing people together when they need it most. The boy looked down, twisting his hands nervously. We weren't trying to be silly, sometimes it feels easier to pretend a hero could fix things. Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze steady on the boy. That's not silly. It's brave to dream when life is hard. Heroes in movies are just reflections, but the real heroes are people who keep going even when everything feels heavy. The boy's friend leaned in, whispering, Like Mom, right? She never stops working, even when she's tired. Keanu's eyes softened. Exactly like your mom. She is the real hero here. The words seemed to sink deep into the boys. Their shoulders eased, and their eyes brightened just a little. It was as if hearing someone else say it out loud made them see their mother in a new way. Stronger, not just tired and overworked, but fighting for them every single day. Keanu asked softly, "What do you both like to do? What makes you happy? Even a little?" The smaller boy answered first. "I like drawing. It helps me forget things for a while." The taller one hesitated, then said, "I like fixing old bikes. I think I'm good with tools." Keanu's face lit up. "That's wonderful. Those are real skills. Don't ever lose them. They can carry you far." The boys glanced at each other, surprised that he cared, surprised he wasn't brushing their words aside. They leaned forward more, their voices steadier. The taller boy whispered, "Sometimes it feels like we don't matter, like nobody sees us." Keanu's voice was firm. "I see you, and you matter, more than you know. Don't ever doubt that." The weight of those words sat heavily on the table, but in a good way. The boys breathed deeper as though something tight inside them had loosened. Keanu sipped his coffee, even though it had gone cold, just to give them space. He listened as they talked about school, about their younger sister, about how they tried to help their mom whenever they could. He nodded at every word, giving them his full attention. For the first time in a long time, the boys laughed, not loudly but softly, like laughter that had been locked away finally finding a way out. They told him about a teacher who always mixed up their names, about a neighbor's dog that barked at everyone except them. Keanu laughed with them, his deep voice carrying warmth, making the table feel lighter as they spoke. He noticed how their eyes kept darting back to him, as if to check if he was still really there, if this was not just a dream. Every time, he met their gaze with steady kindness, reminding them with his presence that he was real, that he had chosen to sit with them. Then came a pause, the kind of pause that carries a hidden question. The taller boy asked quietly, "Do you ever get scared?" Keanu took a moment considering, then answered with honesty, "Yes, I do. More often than people think, being scared is human. But what matters is what we do even when we're afraid. Sometimes just standing up again is the bravest thing we can do." The boys stared at him, their young minds processing his words. They were used to seeing him on screen, untouchable, fearless. But here he was admitting fear. It made him real. It made him human. And it gave them permission to feel their own fears without shame. Keanu leaned closer, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. "You know, strength doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes strength is just holding on. Sometimes it's helping your family even when you're tired. Sometimes it's keeping hope alive." The boys nodded slowly, the truth settling deep inside them. The smaller boy whispered, "But what if we're not strong enough?" Keanu smiled gently. "Then you lean on each other. No one is strong alone, not me, not you, not anyone. We all need someone to stand with us." His words carried weight. The boys' eyes glistened, but they held their heads higher. The conversation flowed on, filled with stories and quiet lessons, each word building a bridge between their world and his, a bridge made not of fame or movies, but of honesty, grief, and shared strength. They began to trust him, not as a star, but as a man who understood. The shop around them continued with its rhythm, people coming and going, unaware that at one small table, something rare and precious was happening. A moment of connection that would stay with two boys forever. By the time their cups were empty, the heaviness in the boys' voices had softened. There was still pain, but there was also light, a spark of belief that maybe they were not as invisible as they thought. And as Keanu listened to their last story, he knew that this conversation would live in his heart as much as theirs. Keanu sat back in his chair, his hands resting on the table. The boys had begun to smile a little, their voices steadier, their shoulders less heavy, but Keanu could see the struggle still hiding in their eyes. He knew the pain of pretending to be fine. He had carried that mask himself, and he decided in that moment that words were not enough. He needed to do something more, something they could feel, something that would stay with them after he left. He glanced at the barista behind the counter, then quietly lifted his hand. Signaling without drawing attention, the barista walked over and Keanu leaned in, Speaking softly so the boys would not hear, he asked to pay for their meals not just today, but for the next several weeks. He arranged gift cards that their mother could use, making sure there would be food waiting for them whenever they came. It was a small act for him, but for them, it would be huge. When the barista nodded, Keanu slipped the cards into his pocket, planning to hand them over before he left. Then he turned back to the boys, his face calm, his voice gentle. You know, sometimes help comes when we least expect. It's sometimes life gives us people to remind us we're not alone. The boys nodded, not realizing yet what he had already done for them. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small piece of paper and a pen and wrote down a number, sliding it across the table toward them. This is my manager's number. If you ever need help with school, or if something important comes up, you can call. It won't always be me answering, but it will reach someone who can listen. The boys stared at the paper as if it were a piece of treasure, their fingers trembling when they touched it. The taller boy whispered, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes kind but serious. "Because I do know what it feels like to lose people you love. I know what it feels like to think no one is there, and I don't want you to carry that alone." His voice was low, but each word was heavy with truth. The boys' eyes filled, they lowered their heads, trying not to cry, their hands gripping the paper tightly. Keanu didn't push. He let the silence sit, let them feel his words. Then he smiled gently. "Besides, kindness doesn't need a reason. It's just something we can choose to give." As he looked at their faces filled with awe, gratitude, and something brighter, hope, he realized that sometimes the smallest gestures became the greatest gifts, and he was glad he had chosen not to walk away. Keanu stayed at the table for a while longer, the boys clutching the small piece of paper and the stack of cards as if they were treasures. The world outside the coffee shop kept moving, cars rushing by, people walking past the window. But at that little corner table, time felt different, slower, heavier, filled with meaning. The boys still looked stunned, as if they were afraid to blink and find out this moment wasn't real. When Keanu finally stood, he didn't rush. He rose slowly, giving them time to follow his movements. He reached out his hand, his palm open, steady, an invitation. The taller boy hesitated only for a second before placing his hand in Keanu's. The grip was firm but small. Keanu shook it with respect, not like an adult humoring a child, but like equals, like one man recognizing another's strength. The boy's eyes widened at the weight of that handshake, his chest filling with something new. Dignity. The smaller boy followed, his hand trembling as Keanu held it, the warmth of that moment breaking something inside him. He blinked fast to hold back tears, and Keanu squeezed gently, as if to tell him silently, "You are safe. You are seen. You matter." Keanu looked at them both, his deep voice soft but steady. "You already have the strength inside you, don't forget that, no matter how hard it gets." The words landed on them like a promise, a seed planted in their hearts. They nodded quickly, their eyes shining, too full to speak. Around them, other customers barely noticed. To anyone else, it was just 3 people saying goodbye, nothing special. But to the boys, it was everything. Their whispers of hope had not just been heard, they had been answered. They had been seen by the very man they thought was far beyond their reach. Keanu picked up his cup, now empty, and stepped back from the table. But before he left, he leaned closer once more and said, "Take care of your mom. She's fighting for you every day, and she needs your strength too." The taller boy whispered quickly, "We will, we promise." Keanu gave them a final nod, then turned toward the door. The bell above the shop door jingled as he stepped outside, the cold air brushing against his face. He walked down the street with his usual quiet stride, blending, back into the world. No cameras, no flashes, no crowd. Just a man moving through the city as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But behind him, in that small coffee shop, 2 boys sat frozen, their hearts beating wildly. For a moment they didn't speak, their eyes still locked on the door, as if expecting him to walk back in. When the silence grew too heavy, the smaller boy whispered, "Was that real?" His friend clutched the paper and the cards tighter. "It was real, I swear it was real." They both sat in stunned silence, replaying every word, every gesture, over and over. Slowly, the weight of what had happened sank in. Their breaths quickened, their hands shaking, and finally the taller boy let out a small laugh, a laugh mixed with disbelief and joy. He sat with us. He listened. He cared. The smaller boy laughed too, but his eyes were wet. I don't know why he chose us, but he did. They both leaned closer, whispering again like before. But now the whispers were not filled with sadness. They were filled with awe. He said we're strong. He said we're not invisible. He gave us this. They looked down at the cards and the number again, their hands trembling. With excitement, other customers glanced their way, confused by their sudden laughter and tears, but the boys didn't care. Their world had shifted. What had begun as another heavy day had turned into a moment that would live inside them forever. They imagined telling their mom, how her tired face would light up, how she might cry. Not from sorrow, but from relief. They imagined her holding the cards. Her burden lifted just a little. They imagined her hearing the words Keanu had spoken, that she was a hero, that her fight mattered. The smaller boy whispered, "He shook my hand, did you feel it? It was like he believed in me." The taller one nodded. "Me too, I felt it, like he was giving us his strength." They sat quietly then, letting the warmth of that thought fill the empty spaces grief had carved inside them. Keanu, walking down the street, thought of them too, his mind heavy with their voices but his heart lighter for having acted. He knew they would remember him, but what mattered more was that they would remember themselves, that they would carry the belief that they were not invisible, that their strength was real. Inside the shop, the boys finally stood, gathering their things, their hearts racing. They walked to the counter, their heads higher than before. They held their small treasures close, proof that kindness could walk into their lives without warning. The taller boy said quietly as they stepped into the cold air, "We'll never forget this." His friend nodded. Never. They looked down the street as if hoping to catch one last glimpse of him, but he was gone, melted into the crowd, like a ghost, like a guardian who had done his part and moved on. Still, the warmth of his words lingered. The memory of his handshakes burned into their palms. They walked home together, not whispering this time, but talking aloud. Their voices, stronger, their steps quicker. For the first time in a long time, the world did not feel quite so heavy. And though they didn't know it yet, the impression left on their hearts would guide them for years, shaping the way they saw themselves, shaping the way they would one day choose to treat others, because one man had chosen to sit, to listen, and to remind them that they mattered. That evening the boys hurried home, their hearts still racing from what had happened. The city lights glowed against the dark sky as they walked down the familiar street to their small apartment. Their hands still clutched the gift cards and the folded paper with the number. They kept glancing at each other, sometimes laughing in disbelief, sometimes falling silent as if afraid to break the magic. They replayed every word Keanu had spoken, his quiet voice telling them they were strong, his eyes filled with kindness, his promise that they were not invisible. When they opened the door, the warm smell of something simple cooking filled the air. Their mother stood at the stove, her hair messy, her shoulders slouched from a long day of work. She turned and gave them a tired smile. "You're home," she said softly, her voice carrying exhaustion but also love. The boys dropped their bags and rushed to her, unable to hold it in any longer. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," the taller boy began, his words spilling out too fast. His brother cut in. "It was Keanu Reeves, Mom. He was there. He sat with us." Their mother turned, blinking, unsure she had heard right. "What are you talking about?" They both started speaking at once, their voices tumbling over each other, telling her how he walked into the coffee shop, how he listened to them, how he spoke to them like they mattered. At first, she laughed softly, shaking her head. "You boys and your stories." But then they held out the stack of gift cards, the piece of paper with the number written on it. Her smile froze, her eyes filled with confusion, then disbelief, then slowly, tears. She set down the spoon in her hand and covered her mouth, her whole body trembling. The boys pressed closer, showing her everything, repeating his words. He said you're the real hero, Mom. He said you're fighting for us. She looked at them, her tears spilling. He said that. Her voice cracked. She pulled them into her arms, hugging them tightly, her chest shaking. You don't know how much I needed to hear that. They held on to each other in the small kitchen, the boys speaking over one another, telling every detail. How he shook their hands, how he told them not to give up, how he gave them something more precious than money. His belief in them. Their mother listened, crying silently, her heart swelling with relief. With gratitude, when she finally pulled back, she looked at them with fresh eyes, her exhaustion still there but softened by hope. Maybe heroes do exist, she whispered almost to herself. Maybe kindness still walks in this world. The boys nodded eagerly. He proved it, Mom. He proved it to us. Later that night, as they sat together at the small dinner table, the boys kept looking at the paper on the counter. The number written in Keanu's handwriting. It felt unreal, like a dream. But it was real. They knew it was real, because they had felt his handshake. They had seen his eyes when he spoke. Eyes that carried pain, but also deep kindness. After dinner, their mother sat quietly with the gift cards in her hands, her fingers brushing over them slowly, her tears falling again, not from sorrow this time, but from a strange joy she hadn't felt in so long. She thought of all the nights she had cried quietly, all the mornings she had forced herself to smile, for her children, and now someone had stepped in, not just with help but with recognition. Someone had told her children that she was fighting and that her fight mattered. The boys watched her, their hearts full. They knew tomorrow would not be easy. She would still go to work. They would still carry their grief, but something had changed. The heaviness was no longer only theirs. It had been shared, lifted by the kindness of a stranger who happened to be someone the whole world admired. The boys watched her, their hearts full. They knew tomorrow would not be easy. She would still go to work. They would still carry their grief. But something had changed. The heaviness was no longer only theirs. It had been shared, lifted, by the kindness of a stranger who happened to be someone the whole world admired. As they prepared for bed, the smaller boy whispered to his brother, "Do you think he'll remember us?" The older one smiled faintly. "Maybe, but even if he doesn't, we'll always remember him." The younger nodded. "Yeah, because he made us feel like we weren't invisible." They turned off the light, lying in the dark. But this time, the dark didn't feel so heavy. It felt warmer because hope now lived inside it. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Keanu walked quietly through the streets, blending in as always, his mind replaying the boys' whispers, their faces, their mother he had never met. He knew he couldn't change their whole lives, but he also knew that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could ripple through years, shaping futures, giving strength when it was most needed. He smiled faintly to himself, his steps quiet, his heart lighter. In the days that followed, the boys carried that encounter like a secret fire inside them. Whenever things grew hard, they thought of his words, his voice telling them, "You're stronger than you know." Whenever they felt invisible, they remembered the moment he looked into their eyes and told them he saw them. Their mother, too, found strength in his words. When she worked long nights, she held on to the thought that even strangers could recognize her struggle, that she was not alone. The story of that day never left them. It became a memory they told each other again and again, not because of his fame, not because he was a movie star, but because in that small coffee shop, he had chosen to be human, to listen, to give, to care. Years later, the boys would still talk about it, not as a tale of meeting someone famous, but as the day their lives shifted, the day kindness reached them when they needed it most, the day they learned that heroes don't always wear costumes or carry weapons. Sometimes they just sit at your table, look you in the eyes, and remind you that you matter. And so the whispers that began in a corner of a coffee shop ended up becoming something greater, a story of hope, of strength, and of kindness, a story that would never fade from their hearts. For Keanu Reeves had walked quietly into their world, heard their pain, and left them with something priceless, the belief that they were seen, that they were strong, and that they were never truly alone.